My name is Rabbi Lila Haas, and I'm the Director of Adult Learning and Growth for the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education. And I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with producer, director Paul Bachow and Anita Karl from the film Against All Odds, Surviving the Holocaust, which is premiering at this year's festival.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, Paul and Anita, I just want to say Yasher Koach, thank you so much for bringing us this incredible film. As I was watching it, like I'm sure so many who are listening here today, my heart, you could feel your heart in your chest the entire time that you were listening. And was so connected to you, Anita, and to the other survivors who shared these profound stories of courage, of bravery, and of luck. And Paul, I'm so looking forward to digging deeper into the process of the making of this film and just your vision for bringing these stories to life in such an impactful way. So I just wanted to first share my gratitude, and I'm sure the gratitude for all of those who had the privilege of seeing this film, because these stories are so important for us, not only to just hear, but also Lador Vador to continue telling these stories from generation to generation. So Paul, I'd love to begin with you. Tell us a little bit about what led you to bringing these stories to life through the making of this film.
Well, not to get too far into it, I made a prior film, A Journey into the Holocaust, and it was being shown at many, many locations, and I was at a over 55-year-old synagogue for members, generally a senior citizen synagogue, and they had many, many survivors. And they watched that first film, and almost all of them said they never watch a Holocaust film. But some of them wanted to tell their story. And Gerald is one of them. So Gerald is the first survivor. And then through that same synagogue, I also met Rosandra. So they had a story, and that story was very different than a more typical story of somebody just going through the Holocaust and being taken to a concentration camp and trying to survive in the concentration camp. So these survivors, I basically say 3.5 of them, were never in a concentration camp. So they are describing life amongst the general population. And that brings a whole new dimension to the story. You know, here, if someone is saying goodbye to a parent being taken away, they have real time to say goodbye and go through that experience, as opposed to somebody saying, we got off the train and they said left, right, and I never saw my parents again. So they could actually talk about what was happening. And it's a very different story. But if you noticed, all of the stories are about very rare people. Like Anita was one of only 200 Jews to survive from a city of 165,000 Jews. So they're very rare. And they're telling the story of what happened outside the concentration camps, which was a lot more dangerous than anyone thinks. And so I didn't want these stories to disappear. I wanted them to be around forever. And I call this an evergreen film. 500 years from now, this is how people will connect with these same survivors. So when none of us are here anymore, someone can still have that emotional connection with one of our 4 survivors that they today do face-to-face. You know, maybe they go to schools, and I think Anita will tell you about what she does, but, you know, they go to schools, they try to educate, and that's great. But what happens when there aren't any survivors to go to the schools anymore? That's what this film should handle. This film should replace that loss, but we should not lose the stories nor the connection. And anyone listening to these survivors I think will come away feeling connected to them individually.
Absolutely. I think that absolutely resonated, that you feel a deep connection. Anita, share with us a little bit about the power of sharing your story, and also how this film captured that different perspective that we might not hear in other opportunities of listening to survivors.
Well, first of all, I would like very much to thank Paul for the fantastic, magnificent job he has been doing in preserving our stories and the story of the Holocaust and of the 6 million people who perished, of which 1.5 were little children. Paul, this is a big mitzvah that you are doing. And because of your efforts, I truly hope that it will never happen again. And so I recall my life as a little girl in Poland, in the city of Lviv, where many, many people, Jewish people and non-Jewish people, lived in harmony. Lviv was a very beautiful city. It was intellectual, it was cosmopolitan, and I belonged to a very large family. My mother and my father, my 2 sisters, and many, many aunts and uncles and grandparents. Unfortunately, among the millions of Jews brutally murdered, all my aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents perished. The only survivors against all odds were my mother and her 3 daughters. I have been educating as much as I can throughout all my life almost. After I left the university here in the United States, I dedicated my life to giving lectures, telling people what happened, and trying to tell my story to people that were not Jewish, people that did not understand, people that had no knowledge. Today, sadly, if we poll people on the street, maybe 1 of 10 will know what the Holocaust was all about. And so what we endured was really unimaginable. And just to survive was an accomplishment. But to survive with our sanity intact was nothing short of a miracle.
Thank you. Paul, so many of the themes that are addressed in this film, prejudice, racism, evil, hatred, defying odds, luck, speak to not just this specific example and experience of the Holocaust, but also resonate on a much larger universal scale. Was that something intentional, that you hope that this story also transcends and is able to shed light on a much larger, more universal message?
The answer is yes. That was heavily dealt with in the first film that I did. And that viewpoint of the message of this kind of teaching is exactly what you're saying, to let people understand. I've heard some very interesting letters from students with regard to the other film, because that's been out for a little while. And people in the inner city, in Black neighborhoods, kids say, I never understood why I was bullied before, why I was targeted before. So all these issues of how you segregate people in the population and how somebody can say something that is hard to imagine, because, and Anita describes some of those situations when the woman that they were staying in the house said, "Oh, don't worry that they just killed that Jewish boy. He's just a Jew." Or tearing the body of the baby in half. You know, people may say, well, is that true? I will tell you that that was common. It's in the transcripts of trials after the war of German soldiers. So these kinds of things, it's very hard to imagine anybody doing. The important message is that you recognize that people can do these things, and they do these things. And I hate to disagree with Anita, but genocides will continue to occur. And there have been 90 of them since the Holocaust. The Holocaust is its own named genocide, but what human beings can do to other human beings is really shocking. And we are trying to deal with that issue.
Give us a little bit of an overview, if you don't mind, of the process that you personally, Paul, went through from the idea to hearing these stories to putting together this film, and ultimately what, as you were, the footage is incredible of what you have put together. As you're watching the film, you in many ways, because of the incredible footage and archival footage that you put together, you really do feel as if you're standing in that space, in the different spaces that the survivors are telling us about. But bring that journey to life for us.
Well, that was a goal. One of the goals was to make you feel as though you were there. But I didn't want to do it with a reenactment. And the footage is real. And I spent thousands of hours, 2 years, researching all sorts of footage. So that when Gerald says, you know, and we got a potato peel, and that was our dinner for my birthday, and it was the greatest dinner I ever had because we had no other food. But that's a real potato peel that's falling on the ground from 1935 to 1940, you know, or 42, right in that range. So that does give you that feeling that you're there. But you're touching on another aspect of the goal of the design of the film, and that is to make this different than just a straight interview documentary. And therefore, there's a lot of music. There's emotion coming through the music. There are the sound effects. So we want people to feel the emotion. We want it to be more cinematic. And the goal is that more young people will watch it, therefore, because you can narrow the audience very quickly if you just have a subject matter that some people are interested in and you're going to listen to somebody say something. But here we tried to make it, I don't know if you can call it entertainment, but it is visual enough to attract people and to hopefully keep them engaged to go through the film.
Absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned even earlier, I mean, you can feel it within you. I mean, your heartstrings, you're being pulled. You're also the beauty of the film, just visually, as well as hearing the different sounds, you are pulled into the journey. And so I can't even imagine the time and energy that it takes to do that. And so really beautiful. Anita, one of the main themes that we hear throughout the film, and as we sort of see the counting on the side, is luck. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what does luck mean to you, and how, you know, was that something that you thought about before this film, that luck played a role in your survival, or was that something that you reflected on later on?
Well, I did reflect on it later on, although I know that luck had played a great part during our escape and during our survival. But thanks to the great courage of my mother, we were able, the three of us, to survive. we were not separated. She did not allow us to be adopted by a neighbor or put into a orphanage, which that is what most of the people who had more than one child did, because the odds were against saving 3 children. And because of her courage and because she decided not to be a bystander, she did stand up and she fought for us. Mm. When she heard that there was going to be a razzia of the children in the ghetto of Lviv, she spoke to my father, and they decided that they would not stand by and watch their children murdered, that there had to be a way. And she found that way.
But Anita, let me say, the message is not that people survive through luck. It was one of the elements. But I think your mother's story is such a strong story because she had an intellectual curiosity. See, these survivors, every one of them, they had some character traits. They had personality traits. They had certain abilities that enabled them to survive. So your mother was able calmly to say that her purse was stolen on the train and cry and act it out. So she had acting abilities. She had the knowledge. She had a curiosity for education, which allowed her to learn about Catholicism, which then allowed her to get papers. So it's just not the luck, it's the personality, it's the trait, it's a lot of abilities. I mean, if you look at Gerald, Gerald is such a nice guy. You can understand why people were reaching out to help him constantly. I think that's amazing. The personality that he had got others to help him, which is, I think, great. And that's the same with all of them. They all had certain personality traits or have personality traits, or their parents had personality traits that they passed on. And luck is a big part, but there are other things they did to survive that other people maybe tried, couldn't, or never even thought of trying.
And I think that is something that is unique to this documentary, to this film, is that you really gain incredible intimate insight into each of these survivors and to the elements that of their personality and of the mothers or their fathers or the people that are around them, that I thought was really very special. It, as you mentioned, I mean, you know, to put Gardner down on the sheet, and all of a sudden you're, you know, gathering tomatoes and you have something to eat. You know, I mean, all of these little moments, or naming Walter so that he had a German name and didn't sound Jewish. I mean, all of these little moments that we experience bring us intimately into the lives of each of these survivors, and shed an incredible light on the time in which they were living. And as an observer, to think about survival in a very different way than we might have thought about before. And so thank you for bringing us back to that. And
by the way, that's why I had that counter.
Yeah.
You know, the star, it took a long time to figure out. I'm talking to the film people now. You know, originally I was going to have a green box around the frame if it was luck. And then I said no, and then maybe a lucky charm, and no, that was too Irish. And then how do you keep count? You know, it's important that you see, in order to survive, yes, you need the skills, but in conjunction with that, if you were lucky only 3 or 5 times, you would not survive the Holocaust. You had to be lucky more than 10 times, and nobody watching it would actually be counting it. So we're counting it for them. And that way they understand how many moments occurred where they could have been killed, because that's the same thing. If they either survived or they didn't survive, those were all luck events. So, that was just something that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to give that message, but not hit anybody over the head with it.
What are some takeaways for you, and what do you hope this film will accomplish? If you could have, just purely from your perspective, you will know that this was successful and was important because the film accomplished what?
Well, even with the smaller number of survivors we have today, we cannot reach all the people that should be educated. So a film like this should be seen as broadly as possible. And obviously that's one of the goals. If we can have more people see it, that's great, but that's only for today. This film should be seen all the time for the next 500 years, and it will make the world a better place. It will give people more understanding of what threats can turn into. And that's what happens with a lot of people. They underestimate threats. And if somebody says, we're going to wipe you out, they underestimate that. Oh, that's just talk. Well, it's not talk. And as I said before, there are 90 genocides since the Holocaust, but over 55 million people have died in those genocides. So this continues to go on, and we have to be very vigilant about it and immediately try to stop these prejudicial and genocidal beliefs and people that spread it early on before they become powerful.
And Anita, share with us as we prepare to conclude, share with us what is for you as people watch this film and hear your story and the stories of all of the survivors who participated. What do you hope that they will take away from this film?
I hope that they will understand that evil, discriminations, and all sorts of bullying are not acceptable. We must fight them, and we must be people who will stand up, people that will not be bystanders. We cannot tolerate these evil things. So I hope that our story will be remembered throughout the ages, as Paul said. The reason for this fantastic film is memory of the blackest mark on the history of humanity, not only of the Jewish people, but of all of humanity. And through this film, they will be educated and will understand that we may not allow this to ever happen again. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for the power of this film, for the stories, for the challenge for each of us who watch this film to think about our own personal impact that we can have in the world by helping to make the world a better place. And so grateful for you bringing us these stories of survival, of luck, of resilience, of strength, of courage, and so much gratitude to both of you. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. And once again, thank you to all of our members and our sponsors, our community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers for participating in the milestone 25th Miami Jewish Film Festival. Thank you so much.